Good morning. I'm here joined by Samantha Torrance of Access Partnership, Head of Global Government Advisory, and Sarah Lessing, Director of the US-ASEAN Business Council. Thank you for being here.
Thank you. Thank you.
We're here at an event on artificial intelligence organized by the DCO. We have discussed responsible AI, ethical AI, some of the issues that are affecting the relationship between AI and its impact on human rights. And the effect that it has on society, on economies, on growing economies, companies, organizations. So we're going to have a discussion on this. Maybe the first questions that I have for you would be, what does responsible or ethical AI mean for you? And what are the most significant risks that you see that are being generated by AI at the moment? Maybe we start with Sarah?
Sure. So I guess to me, kind of comes down to three areas of what I would define responsible or ethical AI. I would say one, that it's being used in a way that benefits society broadly. Two, that it takes into account any sort of biases or kind of inclusivity as a factor in its creation. And if there are biases, that's kind of clearly disclosed and acknowledged. And then probably the third being that the data that is being used throughout the deployment and collection and training of AI is handled responsibly and in a way that safeguards public trust.
Great, thank you.
I think from my perspective, we see that ethical and responsible AI is used interchangeably. From an ethical perspective, it's very much focused on the moral principles guiding the development and the use of AI, so looking at areas around discrimination and non-discrimination in this case, bias, privacy, etc. And then the responsible AI being the application of those principles in a real life setting. So when we take those principles into an operational perspective, looking at governance frameworks or risk assessment tools, testing and validation tools that can help ensure that those principles are applied in that operational setting. In terms of the major risks, I think having a very clear guidance and policy structure when it comes to that ethical infrastructure that we're looking at from a policy perspective. So for being very clear that in the case of the DCO, it's human rights based, risk-based approach to the development and the use of AI. I think that the debate around the risks to AI is quite a vocal one at the moment, and we're all very aware of those micro risks related to, like Sarah's mentioned, privacy issues, the use of data, etc. From my perspective, I'm also very concerned by those macro questions around AI and how it is disseminated around the world, and in particular, a sort of a two-tier system arising where there's a number of countries and companies that are very dominant in the development and the implementation of AI, and countries or economies or groups of society being left behind. And so, the work that I'm most focused on is looking at that overarching policy and governance framework to make sure that everyone benefits from, ethical AI and its implementation.
So are there any recommendations, anything that you think could help address some of these risks or get us there?
It's such a global issue, and it's very much a key policy issue that we're faced with at a government level, but also at a company level, at an individual level. I think there's very much a role for government to play, both nationally and internationally, to really identify. To firstly identify risks, to identify mitigation strategies, and to be very clear in terms of their approach to both supporting the innovation and the exponential benefit that AI can bring to economies and society, but also really playing a part in managing the risks that can be quite significant down the line with the misuse or the unintended consequences of the use of AI. So having a very clear policy and governance framework that government can really signpost its intentions, and from that, similarly, organizations taking this technology and the policy issues around it very seriously, and taking that national guidance, for instance, and applying it in their own setting from a corporate perspective, which then has a knock-on effect in terms of how individuals and citizens view AI and come to trust AI in the future.
Great. Is that Sarah?
Yeah, I would say definitely kind of adhering. Each ecosystem player can have a different part of the spectrum in applying AI responsibly. I mean, companies about creating solutions that, again, are solving broader societal challenges. You know, if you're in the venture capital space, probably making sure that your portfolio companies all have a strategy or have thought about how they're deploying AI in their organizations. If you're an SME, I mean, there's room at the table for those voices. There probably should be more of those voices at the table, not just the big guys. And, you know, if you're a user of AI as well, too, kind of, knowing where your information is coming from and you know, developing, kind of being part of this broader skills ecosystem that is needed to make the AI boom flourish.
And is there something, do you think, that governments can do to support this either use or development of responsible AI more broadly?
I think looking at ASEAN specifically, they've taken a lighter touch approach when it comes to how they're talking about AI, which is good. That does allow for more space for innovation. At the same time, they've invited dialogue with the private sector. I think public-private partnerships are important. And they've put out a guideline on responsible AI and ethics. The US government has come in and done some work as well, too. So there's the responsible AI roadmap here in ASEAN. So I think having these guidelines are a good way to facilitate conversation and to invite consultation, input, and dialogue with different segments of the private sector as well.
Okay. Samantha?
I mean, just to add on to what Sarah said, I think the government has a role to play in terms of training and capacity building, you know, from a very young age within the education systems that we have in countries. You know, I think going back to the risk that I mentioned earlier about people being left behind, we really need to make sure that you know, people have the skill set in front of them to be able to interact and participate in this new frontier and this new world that involves AI. So that's very much a government policy issue, education and skills. And then the second is investment support, or, you know, startup support to the SME environment. I think we see at the moment, you know, the debate is very much focused on the large tech players who have a very, you know, vocal and dominant position at the moment, which is great. They're pushing the technology forward. But we want to make sure that there's a multi-stakeholder view, and small enterprises that are, you know, equally as innovative, you know, do need support from an investment perspective as well going forward.
So speaking of the SME or the private sector ecosystem around AI, are there any examples of a success story or something that you've heard about a company that you think is worth highlighting, or maybe some initiative that you think is worth mentioning?
I think I could list several. I mean, we represent over 180 companies, and a lot of them are using AI in some way, shape, or form in their workflows. One that I heard recently is actually here in Southeast Asia. Google has an initiative called Project Greenlight, which is focused on reducing traffic emissions, and essentially they're combining AI and data from their Maps, Google Maps tool, to reduce the amount of time that cars are sitting at stoplights, because that's actually where the most amount of emissions occur in the transport process. They also had a survey where I think here in Southeast Asia, people think that the most AI will have the most impact in the sectors of healthcare, education, and transportation, interestingly. And I think it's maybe, you know, because those are ones where people can see and feel the most day-to-day impacts of those. Another couple I'll mention, Atmo is a company we work with. They're based in California, but they use AI to very accurately predict weather forecasting. I think something like 90% better than traditional forecasting methods. But then, you know, there are so many companies that are doubling down on their commitments, investments to training, to infrastructure building. I mean, Amazon, Microsoft, Oracle, I know are all several that have announced major investments in Southeast Asia on training and upskilling and infrastructure development.
Excellent, very interesting, thanks.
I don't have specific examples, but just to highlight the participants that we've had at the session today, talking about their ethical AI policy toolkit. Broadly speaking, very heavily private sector orientated and specifically startups, across a number of sectors, whether that's healthcare, business services and operations, HR and recruitment. So there's definitely firstly a lot of interest. There is support out there for SME developments, but crucially, and I think really interestingly, these entities want to be involved in some of the decisions around that governance discussion. So it's not just about investment support or skills and training support, but it's also how can we have a voice in how that governance framework is going to be developed, and that's really encouraging.
So speaking of AI governance, just as a last question, how do you see it evolving over, let's say, the next year?
Inclusivity piece is a big one. I think Singapore has developed a large language model called Sea Lion. It actually stands for Southeast Asian Languages in One Network. But essentially, I mean, it was developed with these principles of inclusivity. It has, I think, 11 languages of the region that they've integrated in, and it kind of like Singapore has their transport hub ambitions. I think, making an interoperable model and a system. So I think interoperability is going to be a big, hopefully, a trend that we see. And then I guess this is a little bit more of a broader ecosystem consideration, but something I'm hearing and seeing a lot about is, again, just the corresponding infrastructure that's needed to support this AI boom, specifically data centers. And then when you even go further upstream than that, then the energy that's needed to supply those data centers, land, water, renewable, sustainable energy. And these are all very prominent conversations right now in Southeast Asia, I'm sure, all over the world.
Very true, and I'm hearing a lot of that in conferences and events. Samantha?
I think Sarah's covered a lot of the elements that I was going to talk about, but yes, definitely sustainability. I think when it comes to interoperability, we're also looking at interoperability from a policy perspective as well. So there's been a plethora of conferences and big forums to discuss the governance framework for AI, both globally but also on a regional basis. And I think we'll see some of that coming together over the next year. So more, I wouldn't say harmonization, but at least coordination and coherence between policy frameworks and guidelines and legislation that's coming out that will help create a bigger ecosystem that players can really benefit from. I think at a sort of below that level, I think we're seeing a lot more interest and sort of the progression to the development of AI safety institutes. So we've talked about the big principal elements, but now we're talking about actually the implementation of these governance frameworks. How do we do that? And this AI Safety Institute idea is very much the one that's being progressed at the moment. And through that, hopefully, we'll also see the connectivity between these safety institutes. So there's knowledge sharing, there's coordination and communication, so that again, we're all moving sort of together at the same pace.
Great. Any closing remarks, closing thoughts maybe you want to share?
Well, I guess, there are a lot of risks that come with AI, of course, but there are equally risks to not using it and integrating it. As the models become more mature, sophisticated, we'll have the learnings along the way. And I think, setting up these digital trust offices and having dialogues and forums like this where different stakeholders can come together, share global best practices, compare kind of what's happening around different regions of the world on this is really useful.
Yeah. I think from my perspective, it's about making sure that we're also flexible and adaptive going forward. The use cases related to AI or the AI technology are only going to grow exponentially as the technology develops, and we're not going to be able to plan for every single contextual situation or any every sort of instance that we find ourselves in. But if we've got a good underlying framework that's principles based, that can react and respond to different contexts and different issues relatively rapidly, then I think we'll be in a positive place.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks so much for your time.